Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. The hearing will now come to order. Welcome. The issue before the subcommittee this morning lies at the core of small business issues. Who exactly is a small business? The answer determines whether a company is eligible for capital or entrepreneurial assistance from the SBA and whether the company can compete as a small business in the $500 billion government contracts market. SBA is trying to take an objective and analytical approach to this question and is revisiting all of its size standards over the next 5 years. Today we are looking at the size standards SBA is proposing for the scientific, technical, and professional services industries. These include the legal services, accounting and tax preparation services, architectural and engineering services, computer systems related services, management services, and advertising today. There is a joke that if you ask any business, they will tell you that they are definitely small, but that their next largest competitor is clearly large. The difference between being small and large in the government contracting market has very real consequences. In 2010, over $150 billion in Federal prime contracts were awarded in the professional services industries, over a quarter of all Federal contracts. Over $32 billion of these dollars went to small businesses. That is nearly one-third of the $109 billion in prime contracts awarded to small businesses that year. Clearly, determining who a small business is in these industries is very important. SBA's proposed rule would increase the number of small businesses in this category by 9,450 firms, which represents 1.2% of total firms in the affected industries. While this may seem like a small number, in some industries, such as architecture, over 98% of businesses would qualify as small. Indeed, some small businesses would see their size standard increase by 400%. That is massive growth. It is my understanding that some of our witnesses today are going to talk about what that will mean to their industry. In contrast, firms in the computer systems design industries are only seeing an increase of 2%, even though those industries have seen major changes in the past few years. I am looking forward to our witnesses' comments on these issues as well. Another topic I hope our witnesses will address is whether the SBA should proceed with its proposal to reduce the number of size standards. Currently, SBA has 41 size standards based on receipts, number of employees, or other industry-specific factors. 30 of the current standards, including the standards we are discussing today, are receipt-based. When the SBA proposes a size standard, it looks at industry factors such as average firm size, startup costs and entry barriers, industry competition, distribution of firms by size, and success in the government contracting marketplace. The resulting number then would become one of its size standards. SBA is now proposing that there only be 8 receipt-based standards and that each industry be put in the closest appropriate standard. These new standards would range from $5 million up to $35.5 million. Since the old standards started at $755,000 and went to $35.5 million, I'm curious as to whether the new standards really fit all of the industries as well as the old size standards did. We seem to have cut out the truly small size standards. Will limiting the number of size standards simplify the size standard process, or will it unduly constrain SBA and keep them from developing industry-specific size standards? If moving to a set number of size standards is a good idea, are these the appropriate standards? Likewise, SBA is proposing grouping related industries into common size standards. I know that 2 of our witnesses today, being architects and engineers, would now be sharing a size standard along with 7 other industries. Does this make your life simpler? Presumably, smaller businesses are less likely to participate in more than one industry so such a proposal might favor larger businesses. However, given then that the industries are so closely related, removing the confusion as to which code is appropriate may assist small business attempting to identify Federal contracting opportunities. Additionally, a single industry standard would not allow contracting officers to choose a code in order to include or exclude certain companies. So this would reduce the number of protests filed over the incorrect NAICS code being used. Finally, I want to hear how changes are being managed in the size standard program. I know that SBA is required by law to review all of its size standards in the next 5 years, but I don't want to see changes rushed at the expense of small businesses. I understand that some of the witnesses here today believe they need more time to study the effects of this proposed rule, and I'd like to learn more about that. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today. I'm especially pleased to welcome another Illinoisan, Walter Hainsfurther of Kurtz Associates Architects, who's testifying on behalf of the American Institute of Architects. I also want to welcome John Woods of Woods Peacock Engineering Consultants, testifying on behalf of the American Council of Engineering Companies, and Roger Jordan, Vice President, the Professional Services Council. I am certain you will help us all have a better understanding of these issues. I now would like to recognize Ranking Member Schrader for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Comprising the vast majority of employer firms and creating 2/3 of new jobs, small businesses are critical to our United States economy. Recognizing the importance of small firms' growth and job creation, Congress has created a lot of programs, Federal programs, set-asides, tax preferences, and SBA loan programs to help these small businesses succeed. However, as a result of that, it's led to a very heated debate over what actually constitutes a small business. What is the appropriate size, as the Chair indicated? The Federal benefits at stake are substantial. Last year, small business firms accessed over $15 billion in capital through the SBA's loan programs. Many entrepreneurs use these loan proceeds to keep their doors open in these tough times, retain employees, and hopefully start to create some new jobs. The SBIR and STTR programs provide billions to small firms involved in cutting-edge research to develop the next new innovative technology for our great country. The SBA's entrepreneurial development programs and other technical assistance can help firms develop a business plan and hopefully find some new customers. How we define a small business even affects the regulatory process and what they are subject to. The Regulatory Flexibility Act requires agencies to assess whether the rule they are contemplating would have significant economic impact on a substantial number of small entities. If a business is not considered small, agencies are under no requirement to review the impact that regulatory changes would have on small firms. Since SBA's inception, it has struggled to find a numerical definition for small businesses on an industry-by-industry basis. On 5 separate occasions, as the Chair alluded to, between 1980 and 2008, the agency has proposed a comprehensive revision of its size standards. However, these proposals are never fully implemented due to concerns that the changes would unfairly strip many small businesses of their eligibility. In these budget-limited times, perhaps we have a different problem. So the result has been a confusing, sometimes unfair patchwork of regulations. The current system, consisting of the 42 different levels covering over 1,000 different industries, is complex. 31 of these size levels are based on average annual receipts, 8 count a firm's number of employees, while 3 rely on other metrics altogether. In addition, the SBA has established 11 other size standards for its financial and procurement programs. Multiple industry groups have raised concerns that the complexity of the current size standards results in legitimate small businesses losing Federal opportunities. I think, again, in these budget-limited times with less dollars available, probably in the SBA budget, it's time to revisit the issue. Under the authority of the Small Business Jobs Act of 2010, passed in the last Congress, the SBA has issued proposed standard changes for a number of industries in the professional services, architect, and engineering section. In the proposal, the SBA has taken a number of steps to streamline and simplify the standards, theoretically to help firms and Federal agencies determine who qualifies for a small business loan accurately and quickly. These changes include reducing the number and size limits from 31 to 8, proposal also groups industries, as the Chair said, under a common size standard. And while there is a lot of consensus on improving the system, the question is, are these the right ways to improve it? Today we will examine how current size standards are applied in the real world, hopefully as a result of this panel. We will also hear from industries that will be directly affected by SBA's proposed changes and help guide our decisions. It is my hope the SBA has learned from past failures and taken industry as well as congressional concerns into account when drafting the proposal, and I imagine I will hear that here. In advance of the testimony, I want to thank all the witnesses who have traveled here for their participation and insights on the important topic. And you want me to introduce the other witness at this time, Mr. Chair?
Yes. Do, but let me also say how pleased I am to have Mr. Lanier here as well. So
yeah. It was my job to introduce you, Mr. Lanier.
No,
the Chair
no.
did not forget you.
We both want to introduce you. Go ahead.
So.
Okay, great. And you can when we get to them. If committee members have an opening statement prepared, I ask that they be submitted for the record. You will each have 5 minutes to testify. Do your best to keep it to 5 minutes, though I'll be as lenient as I can be. So welcome to all 4 of you. We will begin with our first witness again, Mr. Hainsfurther, who is testifying on behalf of the American Institute of Architects. He's the president of Associates Architects, a 7-person firm based in Des Plaines, Illinois, and former national vice president of the American Institute of Architects. Mr. Hainsfurther, I look forward to your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Walsh, Ranking Member Schrader, and members of the committee. My name is Walter J. Hainsfurther, FAIA. I'm president of Kurtz Associates Architects, a 7-person architectural firm based in Des Plaines, Illinois, and a former national vice president of the American Institute of Architects. As I mentioned to the Chair on the way in, I've also, over my 30 years of practice, done a number of projects, not only in the Chairman's district, but throughout the Chicago area. I want to thank you for the opportunity today to testify on behalf of my firm and the 76,000 members of the American Institute of Architects. The current economic crisis has affected every American, but as this committee knows all too well, it has hit small businesses like mine particularly hard. Billings at my company are down 80% from 2 years ago. I have gone from a firm of 25 architects 5 years ago down to 5 architects today. I personally have not taken a salary in 2 years so that I can keep the lights on and pay my employees. Architects are, by and large, small business people. 95% of U.S. architecture firms employ 50 people or less. In fact, the vast majority practice in 1- or 2-person firms. They are truly the engine that drives the design and construction industry. The AIA wants to work together with the SBA to help American small businesses come out of this recession. When the SBA makes changes to its small business standards, AIA members pay attention. The SBA's goal is to ease the administrative oversight by limiting the number of exemptions from standards and reduce the number of levels that they have for small business. The SBA also wants to increase the number of businesses that qualify as a small business, and it has proposed to increase the size standards accordingly. Their analysis states that it will increase the number of businesses that qualify for SBA programs from 35% to 41%. But for our members, it has a far different effect. The AIA estimates that over 91% of architecture firms fall under the current $4.5 million standard. If the standard is raised to $19 million, over 97% of the firms will qualify as a small business. The proposed standard is being increased 322%, which would encompass not just a majority, but almost every architectural firm in this country. In short, the SBA is asking firms that have 5 employees like mine to compete against those that have over 50. As you can see, the SBA's goal of increasing participation in the architectural market is too broad, and their proposal has overreached. The consensus is clear among AIA members that the proposed increase in the threshold is high. The AIA is continuing to gather comments from our members on the proper recommendation to make to the SBA. However, the AIA represents over 76,000 architects, intern architects, and allied professionals, and many will be impacted by these changes. To find the best recommendation for SBA, we ask the committee to join with us in encouraging the SBA to extend the response period. We would appreciate at least another 60 days to continue to gather and compile information from our members so that the SBA can make the best decision using the most accurate data possible. We have two requests outside of the size standards for the committee. The first is the review of the net revenue calculation for architecture firms. In the past, AIA members have stated that over 50% of their gross revenue can be attributed to payments that flow through to subcontractors. Those payments affect the firm's gross revenue number, but are not actually part of the firm's revenue. The second issue is whether SBA's use of receipts is appropriate for architecture firms. As you can tell, architecture firms can be extremely small, and in fact, in the recession, more small firms are created. Instead of consolidating as people lose their jobs, they hang out their shingles. Net receipts may not accurately represent this situation as well as the number of employees. We believe that net receipts for these two reasons may not be the best metric to determine small business sizes. We ask the committee for further review. In conclusion, I would like to thank Chairman Walsh, Ranking Member Schrader, and the members of the committee for giving me the opportunity to testify before you today. I want to commend you for your dedication to the problems that small businesses face in this economy and for your leadership in advancing legislation that helps small businesses drive the economy. The challenges that we as small business people face are serious, but so is our commitment to play a leading role in rebuilding and renewing our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Haynes. Further, our second witness is John Woods, testifying on behalf of the American Council of Engineering Companies. Mr. Woods is the founder and principal of Woods Peacock Engineering Consultants, Inc., a service-disabled veteran-owned small business that provides structural engineering services in Alexandria, Virginia. Welcome, Mr. Woods. I look forward to your testimony.
Thank you. Chairman Walsh, Ranking Member Schrader, and members of the subcommittee, I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today about the changes to small business size standards, particularly the unique considerations of AE services. I will also address factors that must be considered when SBA proposes changing the small business size standard by 400%. I represent the American Council of Engineering Companies, the voice of America's engineering industry, with almost 6,000 member firms employing more than 500,000 engineers and other professionals, responsible for $500 billion of private and public works annually. Over 70% of these 6,000 firms are small businesses with less than 30 employees. As ACEC members are working as we speak to better understand the rationale behind the SBA proposal, it has become very apparent that we need an extension of more than the present 2 months and the comment period identified by SBA. We must review their 16-month analysis to develop alternative approaches and consider the effects on future competition, QBS use, and current small firm finances and contracting opportunities. ACEC asks for your consideration and support of a September 30th, 2011 extension. We'd like to draw your attention to a number of key issues. First, the actual use of engineering firms of varying sizes is unknown. If the proposed rule is put into place using the demographics of ACEC membership, more than 90% of the nation's engineering industry, up from 70% from now, would be classified as small business. Data needs to be collected to better aggregate firms of various sizes doing responsible work based on many requirements, including licensure, regardless of contracting tier. A second key point, the size standard, ACEC policies of encouraging small firm participation in the Federal sector should reflect the fact that small firms are an integral part of teams submitting on Federal work and selected under QBS for their capabilities. The qualifications and responsibilities of each firm member are clearly delineated in the proposal they submit to the agency when competing for contracts. AE firms provide services in the varied technical disciplines of architecture, mechanical, electrical, civil, structural, and other engineering. All states require professional licenses for the individuals performing this work as well as for their firm. Like my Commonwealth of Virginia, the majority ownership of the firm must be licensed in the Commonwealth. Firm size and capabilities are also controlled by the interest of professionals in their firm business model as by the opportunities available to them. Many firms remain specialized and small for decades by intent. Selection boards consider all capabilities of all team member firms like ours when ranking firms under the qualifications Brooke Act selection. The team selected is required to perform the work with the proposed team individuals under contract. The third key point, these responsible roles are not reflected in small business goal achievement by Federal agencies, and revenue data is not available to SBA for assessing government small business utilization when analyzing size standards. For engineering services, team formation and responsible roles go far beyond tracking prime contract awards with only census data. The size standard discussion is influenced by the impact of increased costs and pass-through revenues for small firms serving Federal clients. The SBA proposal also does not take into account small business size standards under other regulations such as labor, family leave, health insurance, defense contracting, auditing, to name a few. A fourth key point, more effective small business utilization would be achieved through the development and retention of a contracting workforce that understands AE services and procurement rules. The insufficient number of contracting personnel, often without experience in procuring AE services or the industry, has created a basis for large contracts that require full service, large national firms to win and perform the work. Finally, the current small business program establishes subcontract goals for small businesses based on the percent of work subcontracted. A better approach would be to establish the business subcontracting goals based on a percentage of funded prime contract dollar value, which would keep the proposed roles and easily resolve usage if all roles were not used. The change would eliminate the absorption of functions by the prime contractor, resulting in no work for the tier small contractor. I thank the subcommittee for the privilege and opportunity to address the AE industries with the proposed size standards, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Woods. Our third witness is Roger Jordan of the Professional Services Council. The Professional Services Council is the National Trade Association of the government professional and technical services industry. Mr. Jordan, we look forward to your testimony.
Chairman Walsh, Ranking Member Schrader, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the invitation to testify and the opportunity to discuss small business size standards today. When debates about industry size standards occur, often there is very little agreement. Very small businesses tend to advocate for lower size standards. Companies operating in the middle of their industry size standards tend to advocate for status quo, and companies that are approaching or slightly above their size standard seek a higher level. The reason for the varied opinions is simple. Companies have a keen interest in maximizing their ability to compete for and win Federal contracts that are exclusively set aside for small business competition. Given the significant increase in Federal spending on services over the past decade, there is much to be gained competitively from qualifying as a small business. Adding fuel to the debate around size standards is the fact that the Federal Government lacks policies regarding contractors operating in the mid-tier, that is, firms that were once eligible to receive small business set-asides, but whose revenues now exceed the size standard, if even only by $1. If SBA policy is not only to create Federal contracting opportunities for small business, but also to ensure long-term success and a sustainable growth pattern, then the plight of small businesses that graduate from their industry size standard should not be ignored, and Congress should explore options that will alleviate this binary approach and incentivize contracting opportunities for mid-tier businesses. During its evaluation, SBA relied on 5 equally weighted major factors to determine the proposed size standards, one of which is the impact on federal contracting and SBA loan programs. However, PSC recommends that greater weight should be given to the impact on federal contracting. In addition, SBA should broaden its evaluation of the federal contracting market to examine barriers to entry into the federal marketplace, not just the commercial space. This, in fact, might encourage SBA to reconsider the merits of adopting separate size standards for the purposes of federal contracting. The adverse impact on small businesses of a single size standard that covers federal procurement and all other SBA programs is documented in SBA's own methodology, in which it acknowledges that the disparity between small business federal market share and industry-wide share may be attributed to a variety of reasons, such as extensive administrative and compliance requirements associated with federal procurement, the different skill sets required by federal contracts, and the size-specific contractor requirements of federal customers. That said, our members have not widely reported significant heartburn with many of the proposed increases to the size standards, as many size standards were increased from 7 to either 10 or 14 million, which will provide much-needed flexibility for small firms to mature. There are, however, proposals for two areas, architectural and engineering services and computer-related services, that require greater scrutiny. As my fellow panelists have already highlighted, the proposed size standard for A&E ballooned, which begs the question of what has changed so dramatically in that specific industry over the years to warrant a quadrupling of the size standard. In contrast, computer-related services have undergone significant changes over the last 20 years, yet SBA proposed raising size standards for those categories only by $500,000. In addition, SBA established common size standards for industries that share similar characteristics. According to SBA, these common size standards reflect cases where many of the same businesses operate in multiple industries. This led SBA to establish a common size standard for a number of computer-related industries, even though the industry data supported a distinct size standard for each industry. For example, SBA analysis shows that computer facilities management services had a calculated industry-specific size standard of $35.5 million. Yet by establishing a common size standard containing this category and other computer-related categories at a level of $25.5 million, SBA has eliminated legitimate small businesses from being able to qualify. In summary, PSC recommends the following. With specific regard to the size standard proposal, PSC recommends that SBA give more weight to the impact on federal contracting factor and broaden its analysis of specific federal market dynamics that distinguish the federal market from the commercial space. Taking this recommendation further, SBA should consider creating a completely separate set of size standards to be used for federal procurement purposes only. In addition, SBA should review its policies regarding the creation of common size standards. Under the proposed rule, the use of common size standards will eliminate small businesses from competition, whereas if the individual industry size standard had been adopted, then all small businesses would be able to compete. Beyond the current rulemaking process, SBA and Congress should support new and ongoing initiatives to incentivize contracting opportunities for mid-tier businesses to ensure that growing small businesses are provided at minimum some protection before having to always compete with large businesses. Lastly, Congress should provide the necessary oversight of SBA to ensure that it is abiding by the provisions enacted in last year's Small Business Jobs Creation Act that require SBA to review and update the size standards every 5 years at minimum. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my testimony. Thank you for inviting PSC to testify today and for your attention to this important matter. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. I now yield to Ranking Member Schrader, who will introduce our next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Odysseus Lanier from one of the 4 founding partners of McConnell, Jones, Lanier, and Murphy, LLP. Over 180 full-time employees. That's great. 3 office locations. Mr. Lanier's firm is the 3rd largest African-American-owned accounting and consulting firm in the United States. Mr. Lanier also, I hope I'm getting the name correct. Am I close enough?
You're correct.
Thank you. Hate to keep repeating the wrong name.
You're okay. You're okay.
Mr. Lanier leads the firm's Federal Services Group, which specializes in working with federal, state, and local government agencies, much-needed service by providing strategic planning, financial management, and operations review and support services. With more than 33 years of professional experience, he has extensive knowledge of federal, state, and local procurement policy, procurement strategies, contracting processes, and process improvement projects. So we look forward to your comments in particular. Welcome, Mr. Lanier.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Chairman Walsh, ranking members, Schrader, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear at today's hearing. And my name is Odysseus Lanier, and I'm a CPA. I'm a partner with the firm of McConnell, Jones, Lanier, and Murphy, located in Houston, Texas. As Ranking Member Schrader has stated, there are 180 professionals in my firm, and we have annual revenues of $17 million. I lead my firm's Federal Services Group and specialize, as you said, in working with federal, state, and local government. I am pleased today to be testifying on behalf of the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, of which I am a member. I'm specifically here, though, to discuss a suitable small business size standard for NACE codes 541-211, Offices of Certified Public Accountants, and 541-219, Other Accounting Services, as they most directly affect the work performed by the federal government, performed for the federal government by CPA firms. We commend the SBA for undertaking a comprehensive review of the existing small business size standards and thoughtfully, I want to emphasize thoughtfully, applying a statistically valid methodology which would raise the current standard from $8.5 million to $14 million in receipts. During a recent meeting I attended with representatives of the AICPA, other CPAs, and the SBA's size standard team, it became evident that the data used by the SBA did not adequately reflect the accounting profession. As a result of that meeting, the American Institute of CPAs provided the SBA alternative data compiled from surveys of CPA firms conducted by the AICPA in an industry publication. Taking the AICPA's data and using the SBA's size standard methodology, I calculated that a more appropriate standard would be at a minimum $19 million in receipts. Beyond these objective data-driven calculations warranting an increase from $14 million to $19 million, the AICPA proposes increasing the small business size standard to $25.5 million to compensate for other secondary factors in the middle market that affect the ability of small accounting firms to effectively compete for contracts in the federal marketplace. Importantly, two of those factors are primarily driven by discussions and suggested changes over the years in federal government procurement policy. An acquisition policy to reduce the number of vendors and increase the size of federal procurements. As you know, we're talking about reducing government. And also, the current use of the sources sought and request for information notices to literally determine if contractors are qualified prior to issuing an RFP as part of an acquisition planning strategy. Importantly, to fully capture the small accounting firms that have the adequate resources in infrastructure, personnel, and cash flow to properly perform services in the federal arena reserved for just small business contractors, we believe the size limit would need to be raised to $25.5 million. This higher limit is necessary to promote growth of these small accounting firms and to avoid this arbitrary cutoff in the middle of the market segment where a firm would quickly outgrow a lower size standard and be forced to compete most likely and most unsuccessfully with the largest firms. And the nuance in our business is the largest firms are the big four, which average about $6.8 billion in revenue. $17 million doesn't compete with $6 billion when you classify it as large. Let me talk a moment about my own firm as an illustration. When my partners and I formed our firm in 1999, having begun our businesses on the proverbial kitchen tables several years earlier, we had 28 full-time employees, no federal contracts, and a single-minded focus to build one of the largest African-American-owned accounting and consulting firms in the United States. In 2003, we were awarded our first federal contract, had 42 employees, and only $4.5 million in revenue. Over that time, we haven't taken money out. we have made substantial investments in business development and back-office infrastructure and technology and proudly serve the federal, state, and local government markets. But by 2008, we exceeded the SBA's $8.5 million size standard limit. Since then, we've had to compete for federal contracts as a large business and have not been nearly as successful because the infrastructure required to support our $14 to $17 million in revenues pales in comparison to the infrastructure of our competitors. Firms who have from $358 million to $10 billion in revenue and are 20 to 500 times larger than we are. Not surprisingly, our firm and other small firms like ours are finding it virtually impossible to compete in a federal market unless the SBA implements a significantly larger small business size standard. I encourage the subcommittee to urge the SBA to revisit the small business size standard for NAICS codes 541-211, offices of certified public accountants, and 541-219, other accounting services, and consider the factors I've discussed. It is widely recognized, as we all know, that small business is an important component in the economic health of our country. It's the engine that drives this economy. Why would you want to cut out a segment of the industry that would be able to provide value to the federal government as a small business? An increase in the small business size standard to $25.5 million will result in more opportunities for small accounting firms to provide federal agencies with high-quality, value-added services while at the same time fueling our economy. Thank you again for the opportunity to come and testify at today's hearing, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lanier. We are actually going to have to go run and vote on the floor. It looks like a couple votes. So why don't we adjourn for about 30 minutes, and we will reconvene after the votes.
Good call, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we're back. We just voted to save the world. Now we're back. The committee will reconvene. I will begin my 5 minutes of questioning, and then I'll yield to the ranking member. My first question is really directed to the entire panel. This is a complicated issue, and each of your industries has unique issues and problems. Give me your sense, as you've been approaching these issues, as to how the SBA has been to work with. Have they been receptive to your concerns, your comments? Mr. Lanier, let's start with you, and we'll work our way down.
Okay, I'll be glad to answer that question. You know, in my testimony, I indicated that we had a meeting with the SBA Size Standard Office. And I will tell you, they have been receptive to our comments and, in fact, encouraged us to follow the entire rulemaking process and make sure that we got them back the data concerns that we had. Because the primary issue that we had was that the census data did not reflect the industry standards and publications that we use to determine exactly what the size of firms are in our industry, as well as the dispersion within our industry. So they have been very receptive to that, and quite frankly, it's been a pleasure working with them to this point. I can personally vouch for that myself.
Okay. Mr. Jordan.
Yeah, I would sort of echo those comments. I mean, this is an extremely big challenge, and the SBA is in the unenviable position of no matter where they set the size standards, there are going to be certain groups that are going to be unhappy. SBA has had an open door policy as far as we're concerned. They've come out and spoken with us. They've asked us for more information. Thought that was a very transparent process by publishing the methodology well in advance. In addition, they outline a number of questions directly related to their proposals in which they're seeking specific industry feedback, and I think that in a lot of cases they hit on the right questions.
Great. Mr. Woods.
I can't add a whole lot to that. The problem is, for my industry, we're engineers, not economists and statisticians. SBA gave us, in fact, advance warning, gave us a schedule of everything every time they changed it. But it took them 16 months to figure this out, and they're asking us to figure it out as engineers in 2. So that's the only issue.
Mr. Haynes-Further.
I would agree with that. AIA has a longstanding positive relationship with the SBA. You know, for instance, a few years ago, we had a major issue with retainage on contracts, and the SBA actually championed that issue in getting the rules changed. So we appreciate that. And we're happy to note that Major Clark today is here today, and I believe also one of the gentlemen in charge of the standards is here today from the SBA. So we know they're open to comment, working with us. We just need a little more time to increase that collaboration and make the standards work for everybody concerned.
Great. Mr. Woods, let me ask you a quick question. In your statement, you referred to the various disciplines encompassed by engineering firms, such as mechanical, electrical, civil, structural, et cetera. The current size standards do not distinguish between these. And in the proposed new size standards, these would be wrapped up into the combined architectural and engineering services size standard. Given the different characteristics, do you think the SBA should propose individual size standards for each engineering subspecialty?
No, very simply. It works well to group those together.
Okay.
Our problem with the engineering thing is the statistics that are being used, because there are very, very large firms, and I'll say somebody like Boeing or Lockheed Martin provides engineering services, and if they provide them in the same NAICS code that I provide structural engineering services in, that's a real misnomer as to who's doing the work.
Great. Let me ask one more quick question at this point, and then I'll yield to my ranking member. Mr. Jordan, for the computer facilities management services, you pointed out that the calculated industry-specific size standard is $35.5 million before SBA adopts the common size standard and reduces it to $25.5 million. Can you explain to the committee what this will mean for a business with average receipts of $30 million?
Absolutely. Simply put, they'll be shut out from small business competition. And it stems from the problem of creating these common size standards in which they want to keep like industries grouped together. In certain cases, it makes sense, but where the size standards differ significantly, they ought to consider breaking those up, or at the very least, they've got to go with the higher size standard to avoid eliminating small businesses from being able to compete.
Okay, great. Let me stop right there, and I'll yield to Mr. Schrader for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'm concerned a little bit. There's this balance going on out there about how we do this, but let's start with hopefully a fairly easy question. I guess each panelist just respond, and that's the goal has been to decrease the number of categories. One of the goals has been to decrease the number of categories, i.e. make it simpler. I assume that means not just simpler for SBA, but simpler for different businesses to figure out do they qualify or not. Is the general consensus here that it's good to reduce the number of different categories, Mr. Lanier?
Yeah, let me take a stab at answering that question. I think it is, because I'll use my firm as an example. When we got sized out of the small business arena with the federal government, we had to make a strategic business decision to move into what we call related categories, related NAICS codes, okay? And we moved into some related NAICS codes that were potentially horizontally integrated into our business. So we created a weapons systems engineering and logistics business underneath our consulting group in the accounting firm. Had we not done that, we'd be on the street right now, because we could not compete in our core competency. And our core competency stretches across industry codes. It's 541-611 as well. That size standard down there is $14 million. That's consulting services, okay? 541-219. That's other accounting. 541-211. That's CPA firms. We cut across all those, and it makes sense to group the like industries together based on the way your industry does business and how you provide these services to the various sectors of the economy.
Mr. Jordan.
Yeah, I think, again, it comes down to what the actual numbers attributed to each of those categories are. take engineering and architecture, for example. Those numbers are vastly different, and so grouping them together just doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Okay. Good.
I agree with that.
All right.
Yeah, I think that size standards can be confusing. Obviously, oftentimes simpler is better, but you have to look at what are the correct standards, not just the size. And as Mr. Jordan pointed out, I think that perhaps we're going a little too far. But what we need is more time, really, to give an honest answer about that.
Sounds like everyone agrees on that. I'm a little concerned in that in this budget-limited environment that we're in, it's likely the SBA is going to have probably less money rather than more money to work with in terms of backing loans and what have you. And, with that in mind, one of the ways to look at this is with less money, you should be decreasing the size of small businesses available to compete. And while that's not necessarily a great thing for those mid-sized companies, how should we respond to that? We're Congress, we're facing a situation with very little money, and who really should be getting the money? Should we create a mid-size type of category? Not all small businesses are small. There's been a lot of discussion about it's not the very small businesses that create the jobs, that pull us out of this recession. So I'm sensitive to both sides of the discussion, but we're going to have very little money going forward. And who should we be targeting, the small businesses or the mid-sized businesses, given that? Let's go this way. Mr. Hainsworth.
Ranking Member Schrader, obviously we're all small businessmen. And in our practices, almost all of the firms within architecture, more than 80% of them are under 5 employees. And so we have a very different perspective, I would say, because architects, they generate, I think, about 8 additional jobs for every architect job in the world. So we need that capital focused on truly small practices, because that's our world, and that's the vehicle that we live in. Obviously, let's say if I was a contractor, my size would be tremendously different, because the needs to perform that work are different. The capital needs are more intensive. So we get by with very little capital, pen and paper, basically, on a computer. So I think that it's going to depend on what industry you're in, and it's going to vary all over the place.
Well, before the next people respond, I'm assuming that we still have different categories, obviously, with different size or employee or receipt size standards involved. So given that, with less money, what should we do?
Well, as I said, most of our what's happening is they're becoming more small firms, and so that need is even greater. Access to capital, obviously, if you don't have a track record, is very hard to come by.
Sure.
And so as these smaller firms start to blossom, because they will, we know that, they need the access to capital as opposed to a mid-sized firm which has got a track record. They've built a record of success, and they'll have better access to capital. And so if the purpose of an SBA loan or a small business set-aside is to start moving these smaller firms to make them more successful, it really needs to be targeted for that purpose, if that's the purpose that you're trying to achieve.
Thank you.
I made the statement that part of the issue is I'm very sympathetic to the mid-sized firms, because in the architectural engineering business, we're a specialized group, and we're selected on the QBS, which is very important. Therefore, you end up needing the most qualified team members. But if the contract says that we've got to subcontract out 35% of it and leave 65% to the prime, that is very difficult in many cases for a mid-sized firm to participate. If you did it on the basis of 30, and it wouldn't take 35%, but if we had a $10 million contract and it was based on awarded dollars, that the small business had to receive 10% of it, $1 million, and that's the criteria, then it wouldn't make any difference to the mid-sized firms. You could have 2 or 3 mid-sized firms that could team and perhaps be qualified. It works very well. The Metropolitan Washington Airport Authority actually uses the percentage of dollars rather than the percentage of subcontracted out. So nobody in our business wants to outgrow small. And I've got colleagues who have done that, but they have returned to small business because they couldn't get any work as a midsize.
Interesting.
With regards to the loan programs, SBA did an analysis in its current revision where they looked at the impact on the loan programs, and they determined that in the 5-4 category, it was only the micro firms that were applying for those types of loans. Therefore, an increase in the size standard wasn't really having an impact on those loan programs. With regard to the mid-tier, yeah, I don't know that we need to create a separate category, but certainly we need to explore ways and potential opportunities to provide them with some opportunities.
As they grow.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
From my perspective, the nuances of the accounting industry are totally different. The barriers to entry are very, very low. You don't have to have a lot of capital. I venture to say right now, if you look at the SBA loan programs, you have very few, if many at all, CPA firms that go and apply for loans, except at the micro level that Mr. Jordan is talking about here. So I think that we need to have the availability for capital for that sector. But when you get to the mid-size, yes, you need to take a look at that as well, because if you can't get access to the capital by normal means in the capital markets, such as going to your banks and having your past performance to do that, there may need to be some look at that to see if there are loan programs that could potentially help those firms. But at the same time, a broad program, it would really affect only the smallest businesses in our sector for sure.
Very good. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Let me recognize my colleague from California, Ms. Chu, for some questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Woods, in your testimony, you pointed out that the same-size firms operating in states or localities within high cost of living may show inflated revenues, which could cause them to be penalized in a size standard definition. Since I represent the Los Angeles area, my ears perked up when I heard that. This issue is of importance to contractors in my district, obviously, and so how could we develop fair standards for businesses in areas where there is a high cost of living without creating more bureaucracy and confusion in the system?
Well, that's one of the reasons that ACEC is, quite frankly, not opposed to raising the size standard for our industry, $8 to $10 million. I'm very appreciative of your constituents. I know some of them well. We actually have the same problem in the metropolitan Washington area as they do in New York City and perhaps even in Chicago. If you looked at it, though, from my firm, if you use 30 people in a firm and you used revenue, because all we sell is time and expertise, if the revenue per employee was $200,000 per employee, you would be, for a 30-person firm, you'd be talking about a $6 million size standard. If you increase that to $10 million, then you provide not only for some subcontracting pass-throughs, but you also provide some additional leverage for the for higher cost areas.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Lanier, your firm exceeded the small business size standard for accounting and consulting firms. As you stated in your testimony, your $14 to $17 million in revenue pales in comparison to the firms with $358 million to $10 billion in revenue. And so you find yourself competing with firms that are 20 to 500 times larger than yours. Other than continuously adjusting the size standards to accommodate firms who are growing and therefore ineligible for small business contract opportunities, what are things that the SBA and Congress can do to support the mid-tier firms who have outgrown the small business definition so that they can continue to grow?
Yeah, I think the first step is to make sure that we continue to level the playing field by making sure that the size standards continue to be reviewed on an ongoing basis. I think the Senate has put some legislation out through Senator Landrieu's committee that requires those standards to be reviewed on a continuing basis. Now, the other thing that we can do is look at federal procurement policy at the same time. If you're going to look at mid-tier firms, allow us to go up to a level so that we won't be squeezed out of the middle market, and then restrict some of the contract bundling exercises that some of the agencies do to try to constrict the number of contracts out there, constrict the number of vendors, and then increase the size of the contracts. So you have to take a look at all of those variables at that mid-market level to make sure that the opportunities are still there for the mid-tier small businesses.
Mr. Jordan, do you have any thoughts on this?
No, I would largely agree. And on his last comment, we have seen instances where you're seeing rather large contracts being set aside for small businesses, and that has some real implications. It presents real risk to the small businesses to be able to perform that work. And really what we ought to be advocating for is that the federal acquisition workforce is right-sizing contracts for companies of all sizes so they each have their individual opportunities.
Yes, Mr.
Could I come back and follow up with that for 1 second? One of the things that I think that we need to look at is this entire infrastructure issue associated with being able to support those size contracts. If you're going to have the large contracts and you have an acquisition policy that qualifies the house, and when I mean qualifies the house, during procurement planning, the acquisition professionals tend to send out sources sought notices and RFIs that ask for the capability and the capacity to be able to do those perform those large contracts. If you don't move the standard up such that mid-tier firms can demonstrate the ability to handle that work, you have a procurement official that manages 3 kinds of risk. They manage cost risk, schedule risk, and technical risk. All of us come from a profit-oriented environment, but the government manages risk. And when you're managing technical risk, the first thing you're looking at is capacity and past performance. And if you don't have the ability to demonstrate that you have handled some of those larger procurements, and you can't do that at $8.5 million, where we are right now, you are completely shut out. And the first thing an acquisition official will do is mitigate that risk by putting that procurement in full and open competition. And that's a double-edged sword, because it hurts the industry, I mean the agency, from its ability to be able to get that 23% small business goal, and it hurts those of us who have to end up competing now with the big 4 firms and the firms who are like I said, 20 to 500 times larger than we are. So that's the area that we really need to focus on here, because that discussion has been going on for the last 10 years. And we need to really start, it's time to address that at this point.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Haynesford.
Could I just add something to that? Obviously, in architecture and engineering, it's a slightly different process because it's a qualification-based selection process. But they still look for that track record and that, I would disagree slightly with the term managing risk. They're almost trying to avoid risk in many cases. And so they're looking for the firms that have a big track record, which many times a small firm doesn't necessarily have to have behind them. But for instance, I wouldn't want to go compete and let's say submit qualifications for a federal office building, in downtown Chicago, but I very well would like to do the OSHA office that's right next door to my office in my suburban office building. So we have to maintain that kind of perspective, I would say, that qualification-based selection doesn't necessarily mean what I would call quantity-based selection, which means I've done 100 of them just like this, but that I have that ability to do it, and to do it correctly is very important. And so, as long as you try and maintain those opportunities, I think it levels that playing field, as Mr. Lanier mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Haynesfurther, and thank you to my colleague from California. I only have 2 other real quick questions, actually coming right back at you, Mr. Haynesfurther. You stated that for the average AIA member, over 50% of their gross revenue can be attributed to payments that flow through to subcontractors. What does this mean in terms of a receipts-based size standard? And how would you like SBA to address this issue when creating that size standard?
Currently, the SBA does account for pass-throughs, and that's going to subconsultants like Mr. Woods' firm and his members. it goes to vendors that supply us with printing and other resources. So the issue with that, as far as we're concerned, is that if they continue to maintain that pass-through and recognized it, that would be just fine with us, because it's not a clear picture of what the revenue really is. The other opportunity, of course, is to look at net revenue and see what is actually flowing directly into the aspect of the firm.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Lanier,
Yes, sir.
given that the definition of a small business, according to the Small Business Act, is one that is independently owned and operated and which is not dominant in its field of operation, do you feel that this proposed rule adequately considers dominance in a field of operations?
I'm going to make that industry specific to the accounting
Please.
industry. It does not consider dominance in the, it does consider dominance in the field, but it considers dominance in the field using data from a source that is not industry recognized in terms of who our oligopoly, who constitutes our oligopoly. Our oligopoly is constituted by 4 firms. If you look at the census data that the SBA used in the calculation for 2007, that says those firms have $5.2 billion averages, okay? Well, when you look at the data from Accounting Today, which is our publication that lists the top 100 firms every year in our industry, that number is $6.8 billion average among those 4. Now, let's talk about that for a second, okay? The 2 most sensitive variables in the primary factors for calculating size standards represent, number 1, the 4-firm concentration ratio that's in the industry dominance category, and number 2, the distribution of firms by size. X number of firms by classification have X number of receipts in the industry. Those are the 2 most sensitive variables in the calculation. So if you use data that is not reflective of the industry, your numbers are skewed. So yes, I do believe that industry dominance is taken into effect, but you just have to have the correct data.
Thank you.
Okay.
I am through with my questioning. Mr. Schrader, great. Thank you all for participating today. As this committee continues to focus on creating opportunities for small businesses, we will keep working on the issues of who is a small business. Following today's hearing, I'll be sending a letter to the Small Business Administration to share what we've heard today, and I'll request that the SBA keep the rulemaking open longer so that small businesses can provide substantive comments. We will ensure that your voice is heard, and will support policies to help you create jobs and spur investment. I ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record. Without objection, so ordered. Thank you again all very much. The hearing is now adjourned.
Thank you very much.